The countdown to Election Day, November the 3rd, has begun. We invite you to unite with us in our calls to turn out the vote. Our mission is clear. We must vote. The AME Church never been shy about standing with and for all people. When slavery was the law, we stood for freedom of African people in this country. When segregation was the order of the day, we protest and held meetings to plan protests in our churches. All of us have a moral obligation to stand for justice, freedom, and equality. Our votes are needed more today than ever before. While the battle won yesterday contributes significantly in our efforts to create change and a better way of life for many generations, we must continue in our quest to restore justice and liberty for all Americans. In the words of the late Congressman John Lewis, the right to vote is the most powerful nonviolent tool we have in a democracy. I risked my life defending that right. I too believe we have responsibility to defend civil liberty. If we are not have the action plan, join with the AME Alert. The toolkits can be found on www.amed-alert.org. Remember, we are in this together. Let's be the change agent. Get out to vote on Election Day. And I'm John F. White, the Bishop of the 4th Episcopal District of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And I approve this message.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Thomas III, and I am the editor of the Christian Recorder. And it is my pleasure to invite you to this special edition of TCR Dialogues today with Antjuan Seawright and Tom Perez. First, a few notes. We always welcome you to comment in this section with your local church and Episcopal district, as well as your questions. We want to hear from you because our dialogues are done to inform and share information with the AME Church, and most importantly, to share information with our readers. Brother Seawright, welcome today, man. Thank you for being with us today and helping us to set this up.
Thank you, Brother Thomas.
Today we have a special treat for you all. We are going to have a conversation with Secretary of Labor Tom Perez. Now, Brother Seawright and I recorded this conversation last week due to Secretary Perez's schedule, and I want to say up front, first and foremost, that we have reached out to the Republican Party and are still waiting to hear back. So if you have any friends who work with African Americans for Trump or the Republicans, know that we're reaching out to them, but the Democrats reached out to us and wanted to chat. So before we begin this presentation, Brother Seawright, let's talk about the role of national committees in American politics. Tom Perez, what does he do? I mean, why was it important for us to bring him on here today?
Well, what has happened traditionally over time, the committees, the Republican National Committee, the Democratic National Committee have always been, I would think, the nerve center for the party. It is where, regardless of the corner of the party you stand or sit in, it is the one umbrella that works for every candidate that falls up under the respective party. Tom Perez has done a heck of a job of rebuilding our party and recalibrating us after a devastating loss in the 2016 election. We're raising more money than we've ever raised before. There's enthusiasm out there, and truthfully, we've made some real investments into perhaps the most consequential community in a generation, that's African American voters, and that all happened under Tom Perez's watch.
Okay, so when we have this conversation, just to be clear, this was an exclusive. This is the first time that I can remember that's been recorded that you have the head of the Democratic Party specifically reaching out to speak to a Black denomination. Isn't that correct, Brother Seawright?
That is, and the truth of the matter is that says everything's about the priorities and the focus around this election and the Democratic Party. I don't know a Democratic chairperson that has done this kind of conversation, and all of these things have happened, including the investments into African American men, the conversations around the importance of African American women and what they've done, that has all happened because of Tom Perez's leadership. And I want to thank him for taking the time out of his busy schedule. As you know, John, he had to rearrange a number of things to make this work for us. So that says everything about him, but it also says a lot about the strength of the African American Episcopal Church. And as I said in the interview, if it is to be, it will be up to the AMEs.
That's right. That's right. And again, just for those of us who are coming out and joining, Tom Perez, former Secretary of Labor, Tom Perez, is the head of the Democratic Party. Those of you who may have watched the Democratic National Convention would have seen him there, and he is responsible for the strategy and running of that party. So we had our interview with him, and we're going to play the video. We thought that the interview would have lasted a full segment, but unfortunately, due to his busy schedule, we had to truncate the interview. So the interview will run for approximately 20 minutes, and then Mr. Seawright and I are going to come back and talk about the interview, as well as some other concerns that we have, because, you know, this thing's evolving. And we've been doing these dialogues to inform you AMEs and share with you what you need to know behind the scenes about these 2020 elections and beyond. So I'm going to check with our production team. I believe, are we ready to have the video? We are now going to play our discussion with former Secretary of Labor, Tom Perez, the chair of the Democratic National Committee. Thank you for watching. My name is Antjuan Seawright, and I am the editor of the Christian Reporter. It is great pleasure to bring to you today a special dialogue we have between Mr. Antjuan Seawright, a political strategist, as well as nephew of Bishop Seawright, and Secretary Tom Perez, the chair of the Democratic National Committee. We are honored to have these two persons today to bring us a special word of discussion regarding the AME Church, voting, and the 2020 election. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming. We're honored by having you here, and we're excited to hear what you will say to us.
Thank you, John, and thank you for your friendship. Let me say what we learned very early in the AME Church as the two most important words in the English language. And those words are thank you. Thank you to the leadership of this church, from the top to the parking lot. And a special shout out to the 133rd elected and consecrated bishop of this church, the Reverend Dr. Bishop Ariel Seawright. Thank you for being not just the bishop of the 9th Episcopal District, but for being my favorite uncle and to Supervisor Seawright. I am so honored to have not only the chair of the Democratic National Committee, not only the former Labor Secretary under the historic 44th President of the United States, but I'm so honored to have my friend, Tom Perez, to join us for a very important dialogue and conversation for the next several minutes. You know, I learned growing up in rural South Carolina that the true measure of friendship is those who will advocate for you and defend you in your absence. And without a doubt, not only is Tom Perez my friend, but he is certainly a friend to the AME Church. Mr. Chairman, welcome to this important dialogue.
It is such an honor to be with you, Antjuan, to be in this conversation. I want to bring you greetings on behalf of Holy Redeemer Catholic Church, my church on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. It is such a wonderful honor to be with you. And please give my best again to Bishop Seawright. We're doing a lot of work in Alabama, and the African-American vote is the difference maker in this November for Doug Jones and others. And I'm so excited to have this conversation with you about the moral reckoning that we're confronting, a moral reckoning that I haven't seen in my lifetime. And so I look forward to this discussion.
Mr. Chairman, you know, we said in 2016, so many of us, that it was the most important election of our lifetime. Fast forward the tape, we had no idea we would be living through two pandemics. Racism, one that has followed us as African Americans for a very long time, but the worst health pandemic with COVID-19 since 1918. And yet we found ourselves saying this is the most important and consequential election of our lifetime. You had the goal and the task of rebuilding this party after we lost the 2016 election, one that I still have political PTSD when I think about. How were you able to rebuild this party energize people, make people believe in Democrats again, but also get us to this place now where we really believe we have a chance to get across the finish line first?
Well, our mission when I had the privilege of getting elected in 2017, Antjuan, was to rebuild our infrastructure and rebuild our trust, because we had fallen short, not just in the presidential election in 2016, but in so many elections in the run-up to 2016. Elections at a federal level, at a state level, at a local level. And so we had to rebuild history, rebuild trust, and we committed ourselves to becoming a 50-state party again, committing ourselves to electing Democrats up and down the ticket, committing ourselves to never taking voters for granted ever again. I did a lot of listening in the run-up to my election as DNC chair, and I've never stopped listening. I think good leaders are good listeners. I remember vividly going to an AME Church in Detroit in the spring of 2017, shortly after I was elected. And my goal was to sit and listen. What do we need to do better? How can we earn your support? And I remember a woman in the church saying to me, Tom, you got to stop showing up every 4th October pretending that you care. Antjuan, I took that to heart, and we built and have built, and I'm very proud of the 50-state infrastructure that we have built. In 2017, you helped us build infrastructure in Alabama that helped elect Doug Jones. And make no mistake about it, the African-American vote, African-American women in particular, was the linchpin to Doug's success. Faith leaders in Alabama, including someone you know very well, were indispensable to Doug's success. And we've continued to build this infrastructure. And I look at our success in 2018 with the U.S. House, with governor's residence, with other elections. I look at our success in 2019 in Louisiana and Kentucky. And I look at our success in 2020 as well. And the infrastructure and the partnerships that we've been able to build with faith communities have been very, very indispensable to our success. Our Interfaith Council is something I value a lot. We have all of the Souls to the Polls initiatives have been so critical in getting out the vote, whether it was for Doug in 2017, Democrats across the board in 2018, the run-up now. You've been indispensable as a partner in our Chop It Up initiative, which is our initiative talking in a really authentic way with African-American men. We've had our Seat at the Table initiative, where we have conversations led by African-American women with African-American women. And I think these partnerships we have built have been really, really successful. And it's impossible to overstate the role of faith communities moving forward. This is the most important election of our lifetime, because in 2016, when we said that, Antjuan, we meant it. But we now have Donald Trump. And the guardrails of democracy have been obliterated. This is a president who takes a playbook from George Wallace and Strom Thurmond. It is the politics of division. People refer to him as a dog whistle president. I'm not sure I agree with that, because dog whistles are a term that's used to describe subtle references to race. There's nothing subtle about what this president is doing. When he says, watch out suburbs, he's very clearly appealing to racism. And the American people aren't going to put up with it. And faith leaders across denominations have been coming together in the run-up to this presidential election to say we are indeed having a moral reckoning. This is a moral fork in the road for our country. And that is why I am so grateful for the work that has been done in the AME community, and we're proud to invest. We've just announced a big investment of in African American newspapers in connection with an African American voter registration day. We are continuing our partnership so that we can get souls to the polls. Turnout. That's how we're going to win this November.
You know, Mr. Chairman, you talk very candidly and very specifically about what I would describe as the most consequential constituency in a generation, and that's the African American vote. We know when Black voters show up, Democrats have a higher chance of winning elections up and down the ballot. We also know that elections are about coalitions and constituencies. Barack Obama was president twice because young African Americans show up, Black women showed up, and Black men showed up. So let's digest that for 1 second. Talk about the importance of engaging African American men when we know 13% showed up for Donald Trump.
Right. No, that's absolutely right. And here's what I would say, and you have been a critical partner in our engagement of African Americans. Our Chop It Up initiative is all about listening and learning. I remember in the run up to the debate in Atlanta, Georgia, that we had at Tyler Perry Studios. You may recall that. We did a Chop It Up where we were literally in a barbershop. And the Chop It Up initiative for your viewers is something that we learned from Barack Obama in 2008. He called it barbershops for Barack. A lot of time in South Carolina. I remember that in the run up to the South Carolina primary. Listening, learning, engaging. And the thing about it here is, you know, Donald Trump in 2016 said to African American voters very clearly, what do you have to lose? Well, folks, 3.5 years later, we have an answer to that question. Your lives. Look at what's happened with COVID-19. Who's been disproportionately affected? African Americans, Latinos, Native Americans. Your livelihood. The African American unemployment rate has doubled now under this president. Barack Obama and Joe Biden worked their tails off to expand opportunity in African American communities. So we see lives, livelihoods, the right to vote. Look at what this president wants to do to make it harder for people to vote. Look at what Republican-controlled states are doing to suppress the vote. They understand that they can't win on the merits, Antjuan, so they make it harder for people to vote. And I know this. I enforced these laws when I was working for Barack Obama, and I saw what Republicans in Texas and South Carolina and elsewhere did to make it harder for Black and brown people to vote. They knew they couldn't win those constituencies, so what they did was suppress the vote, make it harder for people to vote. And so we are going directly to communities because you are correct. There are double-digit gender disparities, African American men versus African American women. And so we're talking directly to African American men. And our faith council is such a critical part of that. And faith leaders, as we move forward, are indispensable to that success. And Joe Biden has a very, very muscular plan for making sure that we provide opportunities for entrepreneurs. African American entrepreneurs are lifebloods of communities. And you look what's happened under this president. Look at the PPP program. It was so hard for small business owners of color to access that program. It's really easy for Trump's cronies to access that program, but not for not for everyday, remarkably entrepreneurial African American business owners. And these are the conversations we're having with people. Joe Biden's going to make sure you can keep your health care. Donald Trump wants to put a fork in the Affordable Care Act. Joe Biden's going to make sure that we have access to quality education, that we invest in pre-K through lifetime, that we invest in community colleges, we invest in our HBCUs. That has been a staple of Joe Biden throughout his career, and that we bring people together. The division of this president, he wants us to be divided. He wants us to be fearful. This president can't even muster the courage in the aftermath of what happened down in Charlottesville to call out the absolute racism, the hate crime that occurred there. Both sides have a point. They're good people on both sides. No, they're not. They were racist, white supremacists who were engaged in violence, and this president can't call them out. And so we need all hands on deck, and that is why I'm so honored to be here today, and that's why we're working so closely. And the most important thing that people can do, and it's been so inspiring to see people coming to the streets in peaceful protest in the aftermath of George Floyd. I've marched side by side. I've been inspired by young leaders, and I've been inspired by their understanding of what John Lewis teaches us, which is that the most important nonviolent tool we have to form a more perfect union is the vote. That's why we got to get out there and vote. And that's why we need people to go to iwillvote.com. It's a tool wherever you are watching this from today. If you want to get information about your registration status, how to vote, there's voting already taking place in North Carolina, for instance. Other states are starting shortly. Minnesota, Virginia, for instance. Get out there and vote. That is how we take back our democracy. That's how we address this moral reckoning. And I'll tell you, I've known Joe Biden for 25 years. He is a man of family. He's a man of faith. And he is a person who believes in community. We all succeed only when we all succeed. Joe Biden taught him, Antjuan, that if you want to get to heaven, you better have letters of reference from people who've been living in the shadows. And he spent his entire life making sure that everybody has a fair shake.
Mr. Chairman, we have about 2 minutes left. I've always been told that if it is to be, it will be up to the AMEs. How important of a role will the AME Church play in making sure that Democrats win up and down the ballot and what will be a generational election? We have exactly 2 minutes.
It's impossible to overstate the importance of the AME Church. The souls to the polls, you have been such a rock and a pillar of everything, all of our success. I remember one of the best days of my life was when Barack Obama got elected president. And we saw how the AME Church was indispensable. Look at how we won North Carolina. We won Indiana. We won so many places. And this year, we can win in Georgia. We can win in North Carolina again. Jamie Harrison can win in South Carolina. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris can make history. But we know that we can't make history without this partnership. That's why our Interfaith Council is working very closely with you all. That's why your Souls to the Polls initiative is so critically important. That's why we're working hard to ensure that everybody has choice. If you want to vote in person, we're working hard to make sure that you can do that in a safe manner. If you want to vote early in person, in Florida, for instance, Souls to the Polls is going to be getting going really soon. If you want to vote by mail, we want to make sure that you know that that is safe and secure. iwillvote.com. Make a plan. And AME Church leaders have been making plans for decades around election time. You can and will be the difference. Our identity as a nation is on the ballot. George Floyd is on the ballot. Dreamers are on the ballot. Our healthcare is on the ballot, and our character as a nation is on the ballot. And frankly, our lives are on the ballot. We can do this. On the darkest days, we often see the brightest stars. And AME leaders across this country are indeed those stars. And so thank you for your work. We look forward to continuing to partner with you and listen and learn from you. Our Interfaith Council, Reverend Derek Harkins, is a friend I know to all of you, and I want to make sure we continue that work together.
Chairman Perez, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for being a political mechanic, helping us recalibrate as a party at the right time. And I guarantee you, it is if we have success when we have success in November, it will be because you have stood in the gap. And we thank you for that, and thank you for joining us. And to all of you who took time to listen to this dialogue today, stay tuned. We will be doing this again with so many incredible leaders between now and November. And remember, if it is to be, it will be because of the AMEs. I can't hear you.
My computer was muted. See, we made that mistake. But in all seriousness, we were excited to have that talk. And again, for those of you who are here, I want to reiterate, we have reached out to the Republican Party. We are a nonpartisan church, but the Democrats picked up the phone. We're still waiting on the Republicans to do so. So let's talk a little bit about what we just saw, Brother Seawright. The thing that echoed to me the most was when he said, we are not taking our voters for granted. So let's talk a little bit about, what the Democratic Party is doing, given the response and the clear feeling from the Black community that we felt taken for granted, and how that has changed. So let's talk about that.
Well, I think what Democrats are doing, Mr. Thomas, is we're treating African American voters as an investment, not an expense. We oftentimes believe or have come to know that Democratic Party shows up a month before the election, bombard churches, send a bunch of mail, throw a bunch of robocalls, radio spots, and say, come out wherever you are, we need your vote. But I can just tell you, as someone who's been very patiently involved in this process, we have made investments early with the right people in the right places, and as we just talked about, at the right time. And that's why I fundamentally believe you see the enthusiasm the way it is. That's why you see people paying attention who normally would not pay attention to politics. There's an old quote, I think it's by Plato, says, if you do not participate in the political process, you run the risk of being governed by your inferiors. Well, in South Carolina, we say it a different way. If you don't mess with politics, politics will end up messing with you. And I think Black people have figured out their network and the strength of that, but also the net worth of our vote and our participation in the ballot box and the Democratic Party. To Tom Perez, Jamie Harrison, Jim Clyburn, and so many others' credit, learned a valuable lesson from 2016 about if we do not show up, you run the risk of getting leaders like Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell. When we do show up, you get leaders like 2 election cycles of Barack Obama, the most diverse majority in our nation's history, which yielded to Jim Clyburn, a good AME, the highest ranking African-American member of the U.S. Congress.
And I think I don't want to push you there a little bit, Brother Seawright, because I'm looking at the fact that we know the numbers. The highest demographic of voters in the Democratic Party are African-American women. Yep. 90%, according to exit polls from 2016, 90% of African-American women voted for the Democratic Party. That's the highest number of any party, like in the sense that no other ethnic group votes in such another rate for a party. And so, given the fact that we now have a woman who is a Black woman as vice president, and Biden has already said, should he get the chance to make a nomination for the Supreme Court, he believes in getting a Black woman on the Supreme Court. But, it's one thing, like you said, to show up and get us when we need to vote, but the policy proposals on the table. There's a reason why we were so excited with Barack Obama, and there's a reason why in 2016 there was a feeling of disillusionment. And now when we're looking in this gulf between, you have the Bernie Sanders wing of the party, which clearly is articulating for progressive proposals and economic fundamental changes, how is the Democratic responding with actual policy shifts? Not window dressing, not painting the colors brown and Black, but actual policy shifts to benefit African Americans.
Let me say a few things. For the first time in 2016, African American participation dropped off. For the first time in a presidential election, African American participation dropped off. As a result, we got Donald Trump and his agenda, the agenda that also includes an agenda of Mitch McConnell loading up the judicial branch, the benches, the court benches, which we know that's for a lifetime. But I'll remind people that goes back to elections, because had we won, the agenda, the policy proposals that would have direct impact on our community would have been at the forefront. And so the way I learned it growing up in politics, John Thomas, is you cannot govern if you do not win. Bill Clinton said to me one time at a very young age that losers do not legislate. So when I think about the loyalty you mentioned as it relates to African American women, I refer to them as the political concrete of this Democratic Party, because Doug Jones would not be senator without Black women. We would not have this majority. John Bell Edwards would not be the governor of Louisiana, a Republican-leaning state, a Kentucky governor that's Democrat because of Black women, Virginia. You can think about every race post-2016. Black women have been the consistent nerve center that has held that together. So I appreciate Black women. What we have to do as Democrats, and what we've been working so hard at, is also bringing along African American men. 13%, as we said in the interview, voted for Donald Trump. When we have numbers like that voting against an agenda that will help our communities, we're going to have long-term problems, generational problems that we cannot sustain. So what that means is we have to make equal investments and get equal results from both communities. Because when we talk about the power of the Black vote, we talk about the collective power, not just individual power from the Black community, but the collective power of the Black vote, where we find our strength. It is my hope and my prayer, John Thomas, that when people go into the ballot box and they see Kamala Harris on that ticket, if you're a Black man like me, you see your mother, you see your grandmother, your sister, your aunts, your god sisters. You see Black women that have stood by you and stood for you for a very long time. So that should be one of the reasons you feel motivated to go out and vote. If you're a Black woman, for the first time in history, you see someone who has hair like you, who looks like you, who understands issues that you face, and yes, will stand up for the Black men that you all have cherished and loved so much. And so it is my hope and my prayer that that is one of the motivational factors that will get people to vote Democratic when they get into the booth. But for people who may be not as excited for whatever reason, or not as turned on to show up and vote, that Kamala Harris being on the ticket to complement and supplement the things that Joe Biden may not have to bring them excitement, that will be a factor as well.
Well, you made some great emotional appeals, but if I could just push you, two things. We keep this narrative of Black people didn't vote in 2016. That's why we lost the election.
No, I didn't say it, John. No, John.
Wait. Now, because that's a story that sometimes gets told. But we know voter suppression was a big deal, which is why those numbers dropped. So it wasn't just we didn't go vote. Voter suppression, because the GOP in power gutted the Voting Rights Act that we're trying to restore. That's what happened, So I'm tired of them blaming bad voters, right?
Don, let me tell you, I wrote just on more than one occasion about how Black people are required, white voters are sometimes asked. We have to get out of that business. When you think about the 4 or 5 states in the Rust Belt, yes, African-American turnout was not high in Milwaukee and Detroit and Cleveland and some of those places. But also when you think about the makeup of those states, the white population is much higher than the African-American population. And so we've got to start making voting against your interest a requirement, as it is for Black voters, same for white voters. And yes, voter suppression is a reality, but that also speaks to the net worth of our vote, because if our vote did not matter, John Thomas, there would not be people in rooms that we are not in trying to take it away. A poll tax in Florida, voter purging in Georgia, voter ID laws in South Carolina, closing down precincts in North Carolina, robocalls in Michigan. 2 GOP white operatives were arrested just last week for sending false information by way of robocall to Black communities. And so, yes, our vote matters. So that is all the more reason that we have to exercise our vote.
And just to go back on the platforms, before we move on to South Carolina, because I know we need to talk about South Carolina, what's going on there right now, especially because of that great debate that just happened. But both parties are not just appealing to your hearts. There are concrete plans. Biden has released the Lift Every Voice plan. And then there's also a specific plan addressing Black men and Black women. And Trump, I think it was 2 weeks ago, released the Platinum plan. So I would encourage you, the viewers, to, yes, if voting for your ancestors, I vote because I know what it cost my father, my mother to vote. But I also read the proposals, and I also know where my interest lies. And I would encourage you, for the people who are saying Black people don't think when they vote, they just go vote Democrat. That's this big Republican attack line. That's this big line saying we're not thinking. Go read the proposals for yourself. They're on the web pages, and you will see what you want to see. And when I read the proposals, I saw what I saw, which is why I voted the way I voted. But I would like to move on and talk about South Carolina. Brother Seawright, you're based in South Carolina. Yeah. And we are waiting. I was on the phone with a friend of mine from South Carolina, and she told me there's a lot of hope going on right now in this Graham-Harrison race. you're in ground zero. So let's talk about the Harrison-Graham race for those of us who may not be familiar with South Carolina politics and what that could mean not only for Black people in South Carolina, but for the country as a whole.
Well, the country's changing, John. And because the country is changing, the tone and tenor and temperature of our politics is changing. And when you look at the South, you see states like South Carolina, Mississippi, Georgia, and Tennessee. We have a high concentration of African American people, and we're thoroughly registered, but that registration does not always yield to participation. In South Carolina, for the first time ever, and this is credit to Jamie Harrison's leadership, we have over 1 million registered people of color. And so what that means is we have the opportunity to do something that nobody thought would be done. In February of this year, Jamie Harrison was down by 17 points to a longtime strong incumbent in a GOP stronghold known as South Carolina. You ask any pollster, you monitor any poll, you talk to anyone, Democrat, Republican, Black, or white, they will tell you this race is up for grabs and Lindsey Graham is in trouble. And you know why? One, because Jamie Harrison is a heck of a candidate. Two, the message and the agenda he has put forth is not a Democratic or Republican or independent agenda. It's an agenda for South Carolina that speaks to the hearts and minds and issues that people have been facing in a very long time. And to his credit, he's done a great job of reminding people about the failures from a policy and a political standpoint of Lindsey Graham, and not to mention the record amount of money he is raising in order to get that message out. And so I said when this race first started, and people laughed at me, John Thomas, they said I was crazy. I mean, you can Google some of the commentary around what I said, but I said that Jamie Harrison was going to be in a political earthquake in Graham land. Well, I said that when Jamie first got into this race. Fast forward the tape, thousands of people watched that debate the other night. They saw Lindsey Graham shaking like bacon, and now they see what I was saying from a very long time ago.
Yeah. I mean, and his words are like a boomerang. Like this whole, like who would have predicted that rest your soul we would lose Justice Ginsburg? And Graham said, you can play my tape back. We're not going to hold any hearings for justice in an election year. And what happens? He said, well, I changed my mind. I mean, it really is eye-opening seeing what's going on in that race. And South Carolina, correct me if I'm wrong, but South Carolina, I believe, percentage-wise, has the highest percentage of African-American voters in the country, correct?
Well, we did in the Democratic presidential primary, and usually we have a high concentration of people. In fact, our elections are usually determined by percentages to where African-Americans could have made a difference in terms of the numbers people register on the books versus those showed up at the polls. But there's not a mechanism that you can implement legally that is not being implemented to get Black people to the vote, because as my dear friend Karen Bass said a very long time ago when this election first started, this Black people will be casting a survival vote in this election. And that's what this election is about. You know, I took some heat a few days ago because I said this election is about life or death for some of us. But I meant it, John Thomas, because when you think about the leaders who will make decisions after November 3rd, particularly about communities that look like ours, they literally will be deciding whether our communities live or die, and in some cases, whether we live or die, considering we're living through the worst health pandemic since 1918 that has resulted in some of the worst economic challenges since 1932. We have social unrest that we have not seen other than in my sharecropping grandparents' generation. And Black and brown boys and girls are being killed by police. Hospitals are closing in rural parts of this country. Education and the access to it is a real problem. Environmental injustices exist in our communities like they do on no other community. And as you said earlier so nicely, voter suppression is still a reality in 2020 as it was in my parents' and grandparents' day.
Exactly. And I mean, again, we encourage you. The AME Church has asked its members, its communities to go vote. Go vote with an educated voice. We ask you to go read the proposals. Go look at the candidates. But this is a life-changing election, and we encourage you to go vote always. And I want us to shift tack for a little bit right now. We've talked about South Carolina, but Brother Seawright, I know that you split your time between your work in DC and your work in South Carolina. So what is going on in Washington, D.C. right now, given that your president and a third of the Judiciary Committee have COVID? We're less than 30 days out from an election. What is the pulse on your Democratic colleagues as well as those on the other side of the aisle?
Well, I oftentimes refer to Washington, D.C. as dysfunctional city because usually not much gets done in D.C., which is why, and we did not get to this in our conversation with the chairman, these down ballot races matter just as much as those at the national and federal level. These state houses, local races, they matter just as much, if not more important, because the closer your government is to you, the more important it is for you. But as it relates to Washington, D.C., we see a president who called this virus a Democratic hoax, said it only impacts certain people, said that it will go away by Easter, said that we should not take it serious, i.e. on the Bob Woodward take, and now here we are. He, all of his top lieutenants, and several other elected people in D.C. have COVID-19, and they're still not taking it serious. We talked about wearing masks and social distancing. He played a game with Joe Biden in the debate the other night, saying that Biden shows up in a big mask. But Biden doesn't have COVID-19. Donald Trump and his lieutenants do. The sad part about it is that Donald Trump will have access to some of the greatest health care in the land. The people who work with him at the White House, the butlers, the valet people, the engineers, the florists, and so forth, who are at risk because he had the virus and others, they will not get access to that same health care. Same thing for the millions, over 7 million Americans who have contracted that virus. In some places, the nearest hospital is an hour away, and yet they're suffering with COVID. Think about the economic impact that's had. And yet, Donald Trump and the majority party will not even agree to an economic package that will try to restore some sort of normalcy to people who have been disrupted by this virus that he did not take serious. Now, I don't want to say the virus is Donald Trump's fault. We can't say that. But the response to the virus solely squarely falls on him, because when Ebola happened under Barack Obama, Republicans were fanning the flames about how this is Obama's fault, etc. The good news is Barack Obama and Joe Biden handled it the right way. The bad news for Trump, he cannot say the same. And when you think about 210,000 people dying, 700 million people contracting the virus, and we are not even in the worst of it, according to many of the medical experts, it's a scary thought.
Yeah. And just going in on that a little bit more, you call it dysfunction city. We are heading into an election. The pandemic stimulus package doesn't look like it's going to get passed. The Senate is paralyzed, and all this in your commander-in-chief is sitting quarantined in a hospital. Speaking of which, and I don't want to put you on the spot right here, but do you think that Amy Barrett is going to get confirmed before the election?
I do. Unfortunately, elections have deep and severe consequences. The consequences from the 2016 election has resulted in Donald Trump appointing almost 300 judges to the upper and lower courts combined for a lifetime appointment. Most of those judges are in their late 30s, early 40s, who will be there for the next 40 or 50 years. They will supersede a Trump term in the White House or a Mitch McConnell term in the majority and the U.S. Senate. So Donald Trump, when she is confirmed, because I do believe she will, would have had three appointments to the nation's highest court. A week after this election, the Supreme Court is going to rule on the Affordable Care Act, perhaps the most consequential piece of legislation in a generation, Barack Obama's legacy piece. They're going to decide whether that lives or dies. That's how important these elections are. That's why we can't afford to take any election off. The good news is we have an opportunity to redeem ourselves in this election. The bad news is that's going to result, the 2016 election is going to result in those appointments, and not just the appointment of Amy that is going to go through. I'm told that they're going to push through 5 other judicial appointments to the lower courts, I think at least one of them have been deemed not qualified by the National Bar Association. So that tells you everything about some of the appointments that Donald Trump is going to make.
And we do know that at the beginning of his administration, Donald Trump stopped listening to the American Bar Association for his appointments. And I should say to our readers as well that one of the things that there's a lot of noise going on. There's a lot of noise about, Trump said, well, Obama left all these judges for me to fill. We do know that the Senate Judiciary Committee ground to a halt on purpose before the election. And these are judges that Obama had nominations for, but was not given an opportunity to appoint, beginning with Merrick Garland. Brother Seawright, also speaking of this noise around the election, these polls that are coming out, how should we read the polls right now? What should we be looking at in terms of this horse race? Because, we're told Biden's up by 8 points. I read a poll this morning. He's up by 14 points nationally. But for those of us who remember 4 years ago, when up until the day of the election, we saw these resounding things of saying that Hillary Clinton was going to come with a landslide, and we know that didn't happen. What should we really be paying attention to in these last few days as we look at the polls, aside from, of course, going to go vote?
Well, we should treat these polls as if they're not worth the paper they're printed on. Because, as I said in that interview, I still have political PTSD from 2016 because every poll I saw, everyone I read, everyone, unfortunately, I was a part of, had Hillary Clinton winning the election by landslide. We started making investments in places like Utah because we had thought that the numbers were going to go our way. And so polls are simply a snapshot of the time. They're not a real reality. They give us an indication of where a small segment of the people are, but there are so many factors that go into polling. When it's being done, who's being surveyed, their voting history, who's actually doing the survey, how the question is being framed. So many things to where I'm at the place now, I don't think they matter. So what I focus on is getting people to the polls, not the reading of the polls. And so if we get people to the polls, and in many places, early voting has started around the country, in-person absentee and vote by mail, the more people we get to the polls before November 3rd, I think the better our chances are. The presidential election, keep in mind, is about the electoral college. Hillary Clinton received 3 million more votes than Donald Trump. Yes, yet she is not the president of the United States. That's why we can't pay attention to polls. In places like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, North Carolina, Florida, Arizona, those are battleground states that will have a large say-so in what happens in this election. And so therefore, we have to make sure they turn out in such a way that even if super exceeds turnout for Barack Obama. But when you think about other races that will be on the ballot, U.S. Senate, congressional, governor, state house, state senate, county council.
And I believe we just lost Brother Seawright. He's been having some connection issues. He'll be back on in a second. He was talking about the importance of down ballot races. And for those of you who were with us last week, we had a great conversation with our AME state legislators. There are approximately 30 people who represent their state legislators from around the United States. Kentucky, Georgia, Florida, Arkansas, who are AMEs. And we had the conversation with them. And we would encourage you to go look at that conversation. We're going to hope Brother Seawright gets back on. But as we wait for him to reconnect, we do want to tell you, and he's coming back now. I think he's just coming back. Brother Seawright is back. So we're going to move on to our final question. But again, let's bring him back in. Brother Seawright, I was just talking to our viewers about the fact that last week we had AME state legislators on the line, and we wanted to emphasize the importance of voting down ballot. Brother Seawright's still getting situated, so I think he's on.
I'm here.
You ready? All right, you ready. So again, go look at what happened last week. We're glad you're back here. This virtual things, we're just glad that we thank God for the technology and we're able to run through. My last question for you it's probably a repeat, but I want our members to hear this. As members of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, what should we be most concerned with going forward over these next 29 days before we get to the election? What should be the biggest concern for AMEs?
We should be concerned with misinformation, disinformation, and I know I'm going to get in trouble when my uncle hears me say this, but flat out lies, because those things are going to happen over the next 29 days. It's already being done. Robocalls to Black households in Michigan with misinformation and disinformation. In parts of North Carolina, what looks like a mail-in ballot request sent to Black households is really a mail piece that looks like a ballot that will be sent somewhere other than the election commission. I think in some of the highest counties, some of the counties with high African-American turnout, those ballots are being rejected. In North Carolina, the president has already flirted with his strategy by having voter intimidation strategies at the polls. We know there's going to be foreign interference because it's already happening. They're going to target low propensity voters, meaning low information voters. All those things are going to be going on, not to mention the closing down of precincts, voter purges in South Carolina, a witness requirement on your ballot when you do vote by mail. So we have to be woke, and we have to be on standby about the voter suppression tactics that will be implemented, because we can have all the plans in the world around healthcare and education and infrastructure and all these things. But if we do not win at the ballot box, those things cannot be implemented. That's why our participation, as much as our registration, is so important in this election. John, you're muted. There you go.
Muted again. I'm sorry. We had a technical difficulty over here. The AME Church, we remind you that the AME Church voting program is AME via alert, and the information about how to navigate your state's ballot, as well as how to defend about voter suppression, and our partners are all on the AME via alert website. We encourage you to be wake and woke when you vote, and also follow your instructions. I got my absentee ballot, and I can tell you it was like a 5-step process. They said, sign here, do not sign here. Check here, do not check here. And if you're in North Carolina, we tell you right now, at this point, North Carolina having a higher than average rate of rejection for absentee ballots from Black persons.
That's right.
Many of them because they're filling them out for the first time. Some of them because they're from rural areas. So please follow the instructions and pay attention when you're filling out these forms, because it's very important that we do this. Well, Brother Seawright, our hour is almost up, but I want to thank you for being here. Many of some of these stellar guests we've had have been because of Brother Seawright, and I know we're going to bring you back on later on this month with your boss, our good beloved friend, I was about to say majority leader, but Representative Clyburn.
Speaking into existence, John.
Representative Clyburn has told us that he will come back on one more time to push you and remind us that we need to vote. Any final words before we go into our announcements for the Seawright?
Look, Election Day is November 3rd. We're going to make October election month. Regardless of the state you're in, there is some form of early voting. Between now and the next time I'm on this program, I hope we'll see so many comments in the comment section, John Thomas, about people who have already voted. They're just out working to get other people to vote. And I meant what I said when I closed that interview with Tom Perez. If it is to be, it will be up to the AMEs. There has not been one Democrat elected in this country. We have not had a Democratic president elected without the strength and the backbone of the AME Church, and this election will not be different. The big difference is, for the first time in the history of this country, a Black woman is on that ballot. Govern yourselves accordingly.
All right. Thank you, Brother Seawright.
Thank you.
We will move on to our announcements as we wrap up. Our next TCR dialogue will be tomorrow, and will be with Reverend Stephen Green and our friend Chuck Hobbs. You will want to be here for that discussion, because we will be talking about Reverend Green's activism, specifically working with Breonna Taylor, as well as other issues. And it should be a great, wonderful, and enlightening discussion about what's going on. As the editor, we thank you for watching these dialogues, and we encourage you to support the Christian Recorder. Please support helping to fund these dialogues by buying a subscription of $36 a year. Visit our website. We just dropped a new digest every 2 weeks. We share new AME news, and today our website has some wonderful new articles we encourage you to look at. We also encourage you to support our publisher, the AME Church Publishing House, for your church worship needs. The featured product is the AME Church Empowerment Syllabus. And also, we encourage you to go visit their Facebook page to look at the weekly AME Church School. To buy your materials, you can go to the amecpublishing.com. And we have one late breaking announcement. This evening, we will be streaming live the Black Church Rocks virtual concert. This will be at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, and it will be in partnership with our partners, the Black Church Action Fund. There will be a lot of good artists, so come watch, be inspired, and be uplifted as we continue to exercise our moral duty to go vote. We'd like to now acknowledge our sponsor, Reverend Dr. James F. Miller, 2021 candidate for Executive Director of Retirement Services.
Hi, everybody. God bless you today. Many years ago, the Retirement Services Department was known as minimum salary, and it was combined with the Stewardship Department. I went to a conference sponsored by them many years ago now, 30 years ago. I hate to date myself. But I received at that conference all the instruction, the materials, and encouragement I needed to go home, not only and become a tither, praise God, but to lead my church, DuPage AME Church in the Chicago Conference, to become a tithing church. I'm so thankful. After these many years, over 1 million pounds of food given to the poor, over $500,000 in scholarships to graduating high school seniors. Praise God, all of the many blessings. And so God called me to revive the stewardship component of the Retirement Services Department, in addition to overseeing the pension. I pray, hallelujah, that you'll be with us on a book discussion that we're having on Monday, October 12th at 7 p.m. Because the AME Church planted a seed. The ministry over these years has watered the seed, and God has given the increase. Join the discussion, and let's bless the kingdom. It's a path to abundance for the local church.
Thank you for joining us today. Please join us tomorrow to hear Reverend Stephen Green and Chuck Hobbs. And we close with this public service announcement from Jackie DuPont Walker of AME V Alert, reminding you as always to show up and go vote. Thank you. God bless you. Till we see you next time.
Good morning. I greet you as a member of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and more than anything else, a member of the Christian faith. November 3rd is Election Day. It is one of the most important elections that may happen in our lifetime. We must make this difference. It's our watch. It's our time. Let's work together for victory, to elect those who care about all of God's children. Let's go do it.